Osaka University boasted one of the most extensive library collections in the country, drawing scholars and students alike to its prestigious halls. Yet beneath its grandeur lay a dark secret that few dared to speak of. Rumors whispered of a hidden section of the library known as the Dark Night, where forbidden knowledge and ancient tomes were kept under lock and key. Curiosity led Karina, a freshman at Osaka, to seek out the elusive section despite warnings from her peers. Late one night, Karina ventured into the depths of the library, following a trail of flickering lights and echoing whispers. As she entered the dark night, she felt a chill run down her spine, the air thick with the scent of decay. Among the dusty shelves, Karina discovered a tome bound in black leather, its pages adorned with strange symbols and sigils. Ignoring the warnings etched into its cover, she began to read aloud from its pages, unaware of the dark forces she was about to unleash. Suddenly, the shadows around her began to stir, coalescing into sinister shapes that loomed over her like specters of the night. Terrified, Karina tried to flee but found herself trapped within the dark night, the walls closing in around her. Desperate for escape, Karina searched for a way out, stumbling upon a hidden chamber concealed behind a tapestry. Inside, she found a mirror adorned with ancient runes, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. With no other options left, Karina reached out and touched the mirror, hoping it would transport her to safety. To her astonishment, the mirror rippled like water, and she found herself standing outside Osaka University, the shadowed stacks disappearing into thin air behind her. Shaken but alive, Karina vowed never to speak of her harrowing ordeal, knowing that some secrets were better left buried in the darkness. I've always loved libraries, their quiet atmosphere, the smell of old books, and the chance to dive into a world of fantasy always drew me in. So, when I got a job as a librarian at an old library on the outskirts of our town in the USA, I was over the moon. But my joy quickly turned to fear when I realized this library harbored eerie secrets. My name is Carrick, and this story happened to me last fall. I was a new employee at the library, which was built at the beginning of the 20th century. It was huge, with high ceilings and walls covered with shelves of books. Most of them were old, with yellowed pages and worn covers, but that didn't scare me. On the contrary, I was captivated by the atmosphere. The first few weeks were ordinary. I helped visitors find the books they needed, organized new arrivals, and occasionally conducted tours for school children. But one evening, when I stayed at work later than usual, something strange happened. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening, and I was about to lock up the library when I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a quiet whisper coming from the far end of the library. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I got closer, I realized they were voices. They were talking to each other, but I couldn't understand a word. I followed the sound and found it was coming from the section of old books that no one had touched for years. This part of the library was darker and colder than the rest. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and began to examine the shelves. The books were covered in dust, and at first glance, nothing seemed unusual. But when I touched one of the books, the whispering suddenly stopped. A chill ran down my spine. It felt as if someone or something was watching me. I decided it was just my imagination and went back to work. But the next day, it got even stranger. When I arrived at work, I saw that the books on the shelves had been rearranged. None of my colleagues could have done it, as I was the last one to leave the library yesterday. Days passed, and the situation only worsened. Every evening I heard the same whispering, and every morning I found books out of place. I started losing sleep and felt constantly exhausted. My colleagues began to notice my unhealthy appearance, but I couldn't tell them the truth, fearing they would think I was crazy. One evening, when I again stayed late at work, I decided to solve this mystery. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, I returned to that section of the library. I started recording everything, hoping to catch something on video. The whispering was louder than before, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up in fear. Suddenly, I saw it. A shadow darted between the shelves. I began to chase it, but it disappeared. I checked the camera recording, but it only showed an empty space. Then I noticed one book sticking out from the shelf more than the others. I pulled it out, and a hidden passage opened before my eyes. It led to an old room that seemed to have been abandoned for many years. The room was cold, and the air was thick with dust. On the table lay old records and diaries. I began to read them and discovered the horrifying truth. This library was built on the site of an old cemetery. During construction, workers found ancient graves, but instead of reporting it to the authorities, they just walled them up. The souls of those buried here were angry and could not find peace. They tried to communicate with the living through the books, leaving messages and moving them. I realized they wanted only one thing: peace. I decided to help them and the next day contacted the city authorities. After lengthy negotiations, they agreed to exhume and move the remains to another location. Once this was done, the whispering stopped. The library became quiet, and I felt the fear gradually dissipate. But I will always remember that eerie whispering and those shadows that haunted me at night. Every time I pass by that old section, I feel a shiver down my spine, reminding me of the echoes of the past that have now found their peace. My name is Lucas. My job at the library isn't the most exciting in the world, but it provides a steady income, and I've always loved books. However, recent events have made me rethink my feelings about this place. It all started a few weeks ago when I received a call from our library director, Mr. Tom. He asked me to stay late to help with the inventory of new arrivals. The library was old, with massive wooden shelves and heavy velvet curtains on the windows. It was always a bit gloomy, even during the day. When I arrived in the evening, Mr. Tom was already there. He seemed a bit nervous, but I didn't pay much attention to it. We were sorting books onto the shelves, checking lists, and talking about various small things. It seemed like it would be an ordinary night. Around midnight, Mr. Tom decided to leave, leaving me alone. I continued working when I suddenly heard a faint rustling sound somewhere between the shelves. At first, I thought it was a mouse, but the sound repeated, becoming louder and clearer. I felt a slight chill down my spine but decided to ignore it. As I continued working, I noticed the lights in the library began to flicker. The bulbs would dim and then brighten again, creating a strange and eerie atmosphere. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to check if everything was all right with the electricity. Walking through the rows of shelves, I didn't find anything suspicious, but the rustling didn't stop. It seemed to follow me. Returning to my desk, I noticed that one of the books I had just placed on the shelf was again on the floor. It was an old dusty book that seemed like no one had opened it in years. I picked it up and opened the first page. It had the author's name, but the ink had somehow blurred, making the letters indecipherable. Suddenly, I heard a voice, quiet and whispering. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to hide my anxiety. No one answered, but the rustling grew louder and came closer to me. I felt my heart beat faster and decided it was best to check the entire library. Maybe it was just a trick of light and shadows, or maybe someone decided to prank me. Walking between the shelves, I felt the walls closing in around me. The space was becoming narrower and darker. I tried to find the source of the sound, but it seemed omnipresent. A shadow I saw out of the corner of my eye made me freeze in place. I turned around but saw nothing. At that moment, when I returned to my desk, the lights went out again. Only the beam of my flashlight pierced the thick darkness. I felt a cold breath on my neck. Something or someone was here with me. I quickly dialed Mr. Tom's number, but the call wouldn't go through. Panic began to take hold of me. Deciding that the best thing would be to leave the library and come back in the morning, I moved toward the exit, but the doors were locked. I distinctly remembered not locking them. While searching for the key, I heard the whisper again. This time it was clearer and more distinct. "You shouldn't have opened that book," the voice said. I turned and saw a shadow on the wall moving towards me. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The light from the flashlight suddenly went out, leaving me in complete darkness. "Do you know why this library is empty at night?" whispered the voice ever closer. "This place is cursed." I felt something cold and sticky touch my hand. I tried to fight it off, but my movements were paralyzed. The feeling of helplessness and fear overwhelmed me completely. When I finally found the key, I managed to open the door and ran outside. The cold night wind bit my face, but I was glad to be out. I looked back and saw the library standing quietly and darkly, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I returned but didn't dare tell Mr. Tom about everything that had happened. He just looked at me suspiciously and said he no longer needed my help on night shifts. Since then, I no longer stay at the library at night, but sometimes when I walk past its doors, I feel something or someone watching me from the darkness between the shelves. And I know I will never forget that night when the shadows came to life. When I was in university, I would take 7 courses every semester because I was doing a dual degree and I wanted to get it all done in 4 years. This meant a lot of semesters I was up to my neck and ears in homework and studying all the time. My university had a library that was open until midnight. I was also interning that semester, so I really had almost no time to do my work. I still lived on campus at this point, and my suite mates could be very loud and distracting sometimes. This was a Wednesday night. I had 4 classes that day and my internship. I also had 2 exams the following day, so right after I finished up at my internship, I went straight to the library. Our campus library was very big. When I got there at 8:30 p.m., there were still a decent number of people everywhere, but from 9 to 10 o'clock, it quieted down a lot, and I was planning on being there until 12 o'clock, studying for my 2 exams the next day. Around 10 o'clock, most people were gone, but there were still some around. I was sitting at one of the tables sandwiched between 2 bookshelves on either side, so it was a little more private and secluded where I was sitting, with fewer distractions. By 11 o'clock, some guy who looked to be in his upper 20s came into the section past one of the multiple empty tables and came to mine, where he sat down diagonally across from me at the table. I looked up, and he looked back at me and smiled as he was setting his books down. I looked back down and just tried to focus on my studying and not wonder too much why he decided to sit at my table. I was going through the slides to study on my laptop when the guy at my table said, "Excuse me," then asked me if I, by chance, was taking a specific economics course. I politely told him, "No, sorry," hoping that would be the end of it. But then he started explaining why he asked that, because his professor gives pop quizzes every day. I said, Wow, that really sucks. Then I tried to go back to studying. Mentally, my mind wasn't completely into the material anymore. Now I was distracted by the presence of this man who I had a feeling was going to keep trying to talk to me. I looked up from my laptop screen and saw that man looking at me, smiling with his lips. I looked back down at my laptop, contemplating getting up and moving elsewhere or just leaving. He then asked my name. I made up a name and said, Linda. He said, "You have such blue eyes, Linda." This was when I started to wonder if this man was really here to study or creep on women, and the fact that he looked like he was almost 30 didn't help. I asked him what the name of his economics professor was. He took a second, then said, "Professor Luis." I asked if he knew the first name. He shook his head, "No." I went straight to web and looked up any professors with the last name Luis at our school. Only one came up, a calculus professor whose last reviews were left years ago. I decided to get up and go ask the security worker at the front door for help. As I got up, I felt the stare of that man at the table watching me walk over to the security worker and tell him that this man was creeping me out, and I don't think he's a student. The security worker walked back over with me and asked to see the man's student ID. He started looking through his wallet, then his pockets, and then he said he must have left it at his dorm. The security worker then asked what dorm building he's in. The guy was clearly lying because he didn't know what to say and eventually just said, "I honestly don't remember what it's called." The security worker walked him out of the library and came back and told me to just be careful while walking back to my dorm. I thanked him. The whole rest of the time at the library, my mind was so distracted just thinking about what a creep that guy was. I did my best to keep studying, and around 12, I knew it was time to wrap it up so I could get some sleep. I packed up and left through the same way the security guard escorted that man out. He wasn't standing there at that moment. I don't know where he went. I started walking through the basically deserted campus. No one walks around that late on a Monday to Wednesday night. That's why eventually, when I was nearing my dorm building and I heard at least one loud sound of a shoe hitting the concrete behind me, I turned around but saw no one there. I knew for a fact I heard a footstep, though. I started to run now, which may have been a mistake because the second I started to run, which was made more difficult because of my backpack, I heard running footsteps behind me. I turned and saw that man from the library sprinting towards me. I screamed at the top of my lungs, but only for a second before I was tackled to the ground and had a hand over my mouth. He kept threatening me, saying, "You better shut up or I'll kill you." I genuinely thought my life was about to end. I was trying to call out for help still, but it was muffled by his hand. He then got to his feet and started to drag me by the throat out of sight of the main walkways. I saw he was dragging me in the direction of the woods right by the dorms. I managed to remove his hand from my mouth for just long enough to scream again. It was enough to get the attention of these two guys who came running over, yelling, "Hey, stop," at my kidnapper. The man let go of me and started running off towards the woods. The two guys came over to me, and I'm sure they were asking me if I was okay and whatnot, but I blocked all noise out for a few moments as I was in total shock. I completely let my emotions out and started bawling my eyes out. The two guys called university police, and I did my best to keep myself together and explain. We went to the library to ask the security worker for his description of the man as well. It matched my description of the man. The police were also able to use the footage from the library cameras to get a clear picture of the man's face. The picture was sent out to all students' phones, emails, and the school website. That same night, there was an anonymous tip that the man was at a late-night dive bar down the road from the school. The police arrived at the bar and arrested him. The level of trauma this induced on me was incredible. I can't even imagine the trauma for those who weren't as lucky as me in situations like this. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.